All right, guys, we've removed our stock trees. We're ready to install our American suspension trees. Here lately, I've had several people make comment about the American suspension trees, that they could buy another tree considerably cheaper. We just had a situation yesterday that I fought for probably several hours. Come to find out, where the stem goes into the bottom of the tree was actually not perpendicular. It's actually slightly off to one side. So basically, I don't know how much that customer had paid for those trees, but they're junk. So not all trees are created equal. All right, our kit's gonna come with a new bearing. This is basically a trailer axle bearing. It's just a 1-inch bearing. I think the part number is 6643 bearing. It's like I said, just for a 1-inch axle on a like a trailer. They give us one, we reuse our other one. Typically these bearings, they really do not wear. For the fact, if you think about it, when it's on here, how much are you really turning back and forth whenever you turn the bike? And essentially going down the road, you don't really turn the steering anyway. It's just, you're leaning from one direction or the other. So we've cleaned this up. We're going to pack our bearings here. Install the trees. After we're done installing our trees, we're then going to go ahead and take our forks apart. To get our forks apart, I've got a little socket floating around here somewhere. I'll say I do. Here it is, underneath the red cap. So this little socket right here goes on top of our fork leg to unscrew this cap. This is the OEM cap. This would fit on here like so. Allows us to unscrew this. You can obviously use a wrench. If I'm not mistaken, I'm thinking it's like a 13/16 to get that broken loose. The socket just makes life a little bit easier to do. Be extremely careful whenever you're removing this. It does have spring pressure under it. Not an enormous amount, but if you are not paying attention, this metal cap will go flying. Murphy's Law is it's going to go flying and hit something of important value. So be extremely careful whenever you go to remove this. Well, then after we remove that cap, when they give us new O-rings, we'll install new O-rings on our extension. So basically, because we've added some rake to the front end of the bike, as we rake it out, we have to make this longer so it'll maintain our stock ride height. To install these, it's got a very large Allen head in top of it. It is going to screw back down into our fork tube. Most commonly, this large Allen, the easiest one to find is going to be a 19mm. A lot of import bikes use this size for their axle. However, technically, it's the same identical size as a 3/4. So either a 19mm or a 3/4 Allen. You're going to want to put a little dab of grease around the circumference of the O-ring prior to installing it. These are aluminum threads. It's real easy to damage these. You're going to want to apply a lot of pressure for the fact we have to compress that spring a little bit to get this started. You're going to want to start this by hand. Do not, under any circumstances, stick an impact in this and try to start it. You're going to have a big problem. You're going to be calling American Suspension to get you a new set of extensions. So, what we will do, I'm going to go ahead and start assembling this. Okay, guys, got my one fork leg here ready to go. Went ahead and pulled out the stock extension cap, replaced it with the one here from American Suspension. Something that I may have overlooked, you'll have these small Allen plugs. Purpose of these Allen plugs, you also have a hole right here in the middle. Now this hole is designed if you're running air ride. If we're running air ride, if we have pistons inside, we'll also have some small fittings here with an air line that will go to it. So basically, instead of offering us two different caps, one for air, one without, essentially they're all the same. Just plug it if you're not running air. I went ahead and put the O-ring on it, put some lithium grease on that one. Before I stick the legs in, we have to install our trees. So to install the trees, I like going ahead and mounting my risers first. Makes it a little easier to get to the Allen fasteners from underneath. I like using the factory dust cover. Install our flat washer, our first jam nut here. Then you're gonna have another locking jam nut. Now for right now, we're gonna leave our trees loose. In other words, they're not set yet. But once we get our legs installed, we're then gonna set what we call our fall away or swing back here, the tension on our bearings. All right, guys, we've got our trees installed. We've got our forks installed into our into the trees, our fork tubes. We've tightened up our steering stops. We put red Loctite on them. Basically, that's going to keep the steering from going any further than it should. We have tightened the pinch bolts on our lowers, on the lower tree. We have tightened the pinch bolts. The top pinch bolts are still loose at this time. Our jam nuts are on, but they're loose, not tightened. I guess everybody's got their own way of setting the front end up. What seems to work very well for us on our 26s and on the 23s, essentially, you notice right now it's got a little bit of movement. Essentially, we're going to try to get it to where it just stops moving, to where whenever I let go, it will actually stay there. And then we'll go back and we'll tighten our jam nut down on the top. Then we'll tighten our second jam nut on top of that. Then we'll tighten our pinch bolts on our top tree. So, to show you what I'm speaking of, a little bit goes a long ways. Rock it back and forth a little bit. It just stops moving. And if you'll notice, I can loosen this back up, and I'm only going to loosen it maybe a 1/8 of an inch. I mean, I just barely moved it. Watch what happens. See how it starts to move? It takes very, very little movement. A little bit goes a long ways, and I'm trying to get it to where it just does stop moving. So right here, I feel pretty confident that it's where I want it to be. Keep in mind the factory settings on a 13 down model is what we call a swing. Basically, you'll bring it all the way to one side, you'll let go, and for example, on a fairing model with the fairing on and the front wheel on as well, it will actually swing once, twice, and start on a third swing. The 14 and newer models is what we call a swing back method. And basically, what we're measuring how far it starts to swing back on us. It's a little tighter. Whenever you start doing these different rakes, you can almost throw all the stock specs out the window. This seems to work well for us. If we take it out and we ride it and the steering feels heavy at slow speed, we may want to loosen it a little. Or we've got an oscillation. You may want to try tightening it a little. If it gets worse, if we tighten it, it gets worse, loosen it a little. So, but this seems to work well for us. So I've tightened that up. I've got it to where I want it. I'm going to take my 1¼ wrench. I'm going to tighten my jam nuts, which is actually going to make my steering a little tighter. Not much, but a little. I'm going to tighten my jam nut on top of that. All right. I can now go in. I want to tighten these. It's a 1/2 bolt. Should be about 55 foot-pounds for a 1/2 fastener. Now the reason why we don't initially want to tighten these top pinch bolts is while we're doing our steering head bearing adjustment, essentially there are trees, we're pulling them closer together. And instead of them coming closer together, if they're all tight, they're actually going to have to bow together, if that makes any sense. Does that make sense as far as the, if our legs are tight? Now, there is an 1/8" set screw that should have come with the kit. It also locks this guy into place. We're going to tighten this up as well. Locking our stem. All right. So now the only thing I've got to do is I'm going to install our front wheel, brake calipers, start the reassembly process. It's easy as that.